Alrighty, so a European king wanted wealth and prestige, but didn't actually want to work for it. So instead, he decided to take an entire African country, call it his Free State, and turn it into one giant torture chamber for his own gain. That was King Leopold II of Belgium. Leopold II's reign is responsible for taking millions of Congolese lives, and to this day, he has basically faced no consequences. I'm Autumn Falls, and today, we're diving straight into one of history's bloodiest crimes. Okay, so today we're gonna start obviously with Leopold. Of course, he already had everything. Crown, check. Palace, check. Check, check. But apparently that just wasn't enough for him. He wanted more. And here's what kills me. Belgium wasn't even a major power. It was small, no colonies, no empire, no global bragging rights. Britain and France were scooping up territory everywhere. Leopold was sitting there confused. All these nations were making it big off the subjugation of entire civilizations, and he wanted in on that. Instead of just, I don't know, focusing on making Belgium better, building something useful for his own people, he obsessed over how to inflate his own status. And he decided, much like every other colonist, he convinced himself the solution was Africa. He didn't care about the people of Africa as a whole in any way. What he saw was land and resources just waiting to be stolen. So he cooked up this massive scam. He didn't even involve his own government. He didn't go through the process of trying to convince Parliament or pass any laws. He kept it personal, kind of like his own little side hustle, his side little business venture. He actually poured in his own money. He built fake charities and humanitarian organizations in Congo. He even called one the International African Association, which sounds noble to the untrained ear, sort of like a 19th century UN. But in reality, it was just a front for the ultimate takeover scheme. And people unfortunately bought it. He positioned himself as a saint who was going to civilize the dark continent. You know, the same racist garbage all colonizers spewed to publicly excuse their crimes. And the world clapped for him, applauded even. Meanwhile, he was sending guys like Henry Morton Stanley to trick, bribe, or straight up threaten chiefs into signing treaties. Stanley, by the way, wasn't just some random explorer. He was already famous for, quotation marks, finding David Livingstone in Africa with the line, "Dr. Livingstone, I presume." Europe adored him as this adventurous hero, but in reality, he was Leopold's muscle on the ground. He cut brutal deals, used violence when necessary, and basically paved the way for Leopold's empire of lies entirely. And let me be clear. Most of these chiefs didn't know what they were signing or what they were agreeing to, because the papers were purposely not translated to any languages that anyone there could understand. Some thought they were securing protection, and others thought these were trade agreements. But what they were really doing was handing over their land, their people, and their entire future. Before Europeans arrived, the Congo wasn't a blank state. That myth drives me absolutely nuts. This was, of course, a vibrant, functional world. There were trade networks spanning rivers and jungles. People farmed, hunted, created art, raised families. You know, was it perfect? No, but it was theirs, and it mostly worked, just like any other country. But then, of course, the Europeans showed up. At first, locals were cautious but polite. You see, strangers coming off boats with strange clothes and weapons, you don't necessarily assume they're here to destroy you. They were holding ceremonies for these people. They offered gifts. They even offered cautious greetings. But the European mask slipped very quickly. Leopold's agents started drawing lines on maps and declaring entire regions as concessions. In translation, this land is mine now. And every living person, every animal, tree, and vine now somehow belonged to Leopold and his companies. But what were his companies after, you might ask? They were after rubber. But Let's pause on the rubber for just a sec, because I think people today don't really get why it was such a big deal back then. This was the late 1800s, early 1900s. The world was exploding with industrial inventions like bicycles, telegraphs, and electricity, and it all required rubber. You know, tires, wires, insulation. Basically, rubber in some ways at this point in time was kind of the new gold, and the Congo had it everywhere. It grew wildly in vines across the rainforest. Now, how do you harvest it? This is where it gets brutal. Workers had to cut into rubber vines, then smear the sticky latex sap directly onto the skin on their arms, legs, and even torsos. Once it dried into a hardened crust, they'd have to peel it off their own bodies, which would then rip out hair or even their skin. Sometimes it would leave open, messy wounds. That was their collection method. You can imagine doing that every single day. Your skin would be blistering, scarred up and raw. Infections spread quickly in conditions like this. And on top of that, you're trekking deep into jungles filled with poisonous snakes, insects, and diseases. You're risking injury constantly, all while starving because you have no time to farm for food anymore due to this deadly demand. Common injuries were honestly endless. Cuts and sores would turn septic rapidly. Skin diseases from repeated exposure to latex were brutal, and exhaustion was so widespread and intense that people often collapsed. Malnutrition was pretty much immeasurable. And let's not forget the constant threat of being whipped, shot, or brutally mutilated if you didn't bring back enough yield. Rubber wasn't just tough, it was deadly, and Leopold knew that. But since he didn't view these people as human, he didn't give a frick, and he demanded it in quantities no human could possibly ever sustain. Villages were given quotas, this many kilos of rubber by the end of the week, and if they didn't hit it, they faced punishment. Whole villages were burned. People were shot, and women and children were taken hostage until the men met their quotas. And if a soldier used a bullet, they had to prove it was used to kill by cutting off the victim's hand. That's why baskets of severed hands became the grotesque receipts of Leopold's empire. Let that sink in. In the Congo Free State, human hands became a currency, and Leopold never even set foot there. He sat in Belgium, cashing checks while millions bled in the jungle. For years, the world looked away. Leopold controlled the narrative with propaganda. There were pamphlets showing schools, new roads, and happy children, but meanwhile, villages were literally starving to death at his hands, and cracks began to form. Enter E.D. Morrill, a shipping clerk in Liverpool. He was just a clerk, but he noticed something suspicious. Ships were sailing to Congo, and they were loaded with guns and chains. Ships leaving the Congo were packed with rubber and ivory. No wages, no goods for trade, just weapons in, rubber out. That's not business, that's slavery. He then blew the whistle. Thank God for him. He quit his job, started writing articles and holding rallies. He was exposing Leopold little by little, as much as he could. And once photos started surfacing, even though they were grainy black and white images, they showed mutilated children. Fathers staring at their children's severed hand. The world just couldn't unsee it at that point. Then there was George Washington Williams. He was a Black American minister, journalist, and soldier who went to the Congo hoping to see Leopold's so-called humanitarian project in action. What he actually saw obviously horrified him. Instead of progress, he saw forced labor, mass killings, starvation, and mutilation. Williams wrote an open letter to Leopold in 1890, blasting him for what he called crimes against humanity. And that phrase was purposeful. It was decades before international law ever even adopted that phrasing. He was one of the first to use those exact words, making it clear that what was happening in the Congo wasn't just abuse. It was something so big, so cruel, it went beyond the language that people had at the time. Then you've got Mark Twain stepping in. He published a scathing little book called King Leopold's Soliloquy. In it, Twain basically wrote a one-man play where Leopold rants to himself about being misunderstood. Well, basically, he's standing in a pool of blood the whole time, mocking the absurdity of Leopold's lies. It was satire, but it was brutal satire. And it made Europeans see what was happening in the Congo in a way propaganda just couldn't hide anymore. The pressure became too much. By 1908, Belgium stripped Leopold of control of the Congo. But wait, don't cheer just yet, because they didn't strip him of the money. He walked away with hella bags. He was filthy rich. His statues are still standing, and his name is still plastered on buildings. The blood on his hands never touched his legacy, at least not in this lifetime. You'd hope that once Belgium took over, things might have improved, but no. They actually just rebranded the abuse. The Congo Free State became the Belgian Congo. Same exploitation, same flag. Forced labor continued. There were mines and plantations. There was even logging. You know, schools were built, but they weren't built to uplift the Congolese people. They were designed to erase culture and teach them to serve Belgium better. Imagine being told every day that your language and your traditions and history are worthless, and the only value you had was now how much you could produce for the empire, and the empire that's not even yours. Belgium became one of the richest countries in Europe per capita because of Congo. Meanwhile, the Congolese people were stripped bare of land, of culture, of identity. And did they get any justice? Leopold's fortune stayed in his family, and his statues, as I said earlier, still stand. To this day, kids in Belgian schools learn about him as a builder of the nation and not the butcher of Congo. Here's the thing about trauma. It doesn't just vanish because time passes, but you don't kill 10 million people, mutilate children, burn villages, and expect the next generation to move on. The Congo has never recovered. Its wealth is still stripped away by foreign companies. Its people still live under the weight of instability, corruption, and wars. And this is all downstream from what Leopold built. And back in Belgium, only recently have they even acknowledged this atrocity. In 2020, King Felipe said he felt regret. That's it. No apology, no reparation, just the polite equivalent of, my bad. Meanwhile, Leopold's statues still stand tall all throughout Belgium, as if he was some kind of national hero. His name still decorates schools and buildings. The suffering of millions was reduced to a footnote in many history books. And that's why I decided to tell this story. Because silence is what allows these atrocities to continue repeating. Alright y'all, so thank you for staying with me through this one. It was rough, but it's real. I'm Autumn Falls, and if you made it this far, don't forget to like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments what other dark corners of history you want me to dig into. I'm hoping to build a community that refuses to look away from the ugly truths and the patterns that we can still see today. So thank you for your support. I hope you have a great day. With your support, we'll keep pulling back the curtain, and I'll see you next time. Bye.